All right, so who caught me there? Okay, if you can hear me, clap your hands. And those of you who are watching, if you can see me, wave your hands. Thank you guys, you're so cute. It's really great to have you here. Where am I? I'm in Berkeley. I'm at UC Berkeley at the campus. It is just after 9 o'clock. I don't know what time it is because I was in New York and so I'm like all confused, but I do know something. It's so amazing to see all of you here, to see this full house, to talk about this issue. I feel honored. Can you guys see me? Because the lighting is kind of funky. Now you can see me a little bit better, am I right? But I'm farther away from you, and I want to be close. So, thank you so much for being here. This really, really means a lot. And before I go through my list of thank yous and what we're doing today, I was thinking about what it means for all of you to be here right now on a Monday morning when you could be anywhere on a gorgeous, gorgeous day in Berkeley. And you're here because you got heart. And I was thinking about the reporting that we do on Latino USA and why so many of you feel so impacted by the work that we do on Latino USA, and I think it's because we have heart. And we try to bring that heart into the journalism that we do because what we're doing is we're telling American stories. There's a sense almost that it's like, oh, those are Latino stories. It has nothing to do with us. And as we know, these are our American stories. They are all of our stories. They are of every group possible, and we put them on the air with Latino USA with heart. So thank you so much. If you didn't know, my name is Maria Hinojosa, and I'm the host and executive producer of Latino USA. It is distributed by NPR. And we're going to be having a conversation today about the links between school and prison. If you're tweeting or etc., it's hashtag school to prison and at Latino USA. Little bit formal thank yous. You know, we wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't for visionary funding, right? Desafortunadamente o afortunadamente es como es, you know, you need money to put on these events and to talk about these issues. And thanks to the California Endowment for supporting us and for you in opening this conversation on a national level. In particular to Beatriz Solis, who is our program officer and has the vision to say, you know, part of the conversation is what the media is saying and how we determine what the stories are and what the narrative is. I also really want to thank our other partner, the Underground Scholars Initiative. Thank you for being so wonderful and so visionary in your work. I'm so honored to meet you. I'm truly, truly, truly honored. I want to tell you also that the California Endowment not only supports this event, but also supports our organization, the Futuro Media Group, and very particularly Latino USA, and has provided funding for our television series, America by the Numbers, which will be back. I'll tell you about that in a second. To the Underground Scholars Initiative, thank you for your sponsorship and for your participation in the panel. I think that that's your real draw, and that's why people came to see you live on stage. I want to give a couple of shout outs to my staff. I'm very blessed in that yo soy la chaparra que todo mundo ve, and they come and they thank me and they say thank you for your work, you know, because you may know what I look like or you recognize my voice, but the truth is that this is a team effort. I'm here because of my team, and I would not be anywhere were it not for my team. So to Annette Nielsen, who put this entire event together, where are you, Annette? There she is, who I imagine was doing some yoga this morning. I even got inspired by Annette, who produces our events today. I was like, what is Annette doing now? She's probably doing yoga, so I will too. And it was really, really good to do that. To my fearless leader of Latino USA, Daisy Rosario. Where are you, Daisy? There you are. You all know her because she is our senior producer and the force behind the hidden history of hip hop. Yes, I think we just got her to commit to doing a West Coast version of the hidden history, Latino history of hip hop. She's happy. She's coming back to California. And Michael Simon Johnson, step out from over here, one of our producers, manning the mics today. Thank you for all the work that you do and for his recent piece on Latino USA about the school to prison pipeline. And Marissa Ortega Welch, are you here? Where are you? What? Stand up. She's our California Endowment Fellow. She reports out of California for Latino USA. Hey, Marissa, thank you for your piece. So 6 years ago, I didn't have a company. Exactly 6 years ago at this point of time, in March, at this date, I didn't have a company. I think it was actually formed in my head on March 15th, and I think incorporated on April 15th, 6 years ago. I'm a journalist. That's what I do, but I decided that I needed to take control and create my own organization. I, like you, understood that I had a leadership role and I could own my power, and therefore I created my own nonprofit organization. It's called the Futuro Media Group. I can't believe that we're almost 6 years old. It's like a dream, and the reason why I think we've been able to succeed is because of people like you who believe in our work. Already I've been hugged several times, many times with tears in your eyes of you telling me what Latino USA means to you and the other work that we do. And we do it because of you. You give us the heart to do it. Quick little commercial before we start with our program. So you all know about Latino USA. You also know that we won a Peabody Award this year. Yes! The first time we ever won. America by the Numbers is our television series. It will be back on PBS. You can follow us on americabythenumbers.org or on Twitter or on Instagram. Not on Instagram yet, but soon. We will be back with a 1-hour special that is reporting about new voters and how we're going to impact the election. That will be a 1-hour primetime special this fall. So please follow us for that. We have a new podcast called In the Thick, where we're talking about politics because we don't have a Sunday political talk show on television, but we have a political talk show on our podcast that is called In the Thick. And we bring you different perspectives from other journalists that you don't hear from on the regular circuit. So please check us out on In the Thick. We're on iTunes. If you haven't caught our new digital short series, it's called humanizing.america.org. We're being distributed right now by NBCnews.com. And we're telling very short stories that literally are humanizing America. We feel that we kind of need that, particularly in 2016, in a very complicated, fascinating, confusing year in politics. I also want to let you know that there are little cards everywhere, so if you feel so deemed to contribute to Futuro Media Group, it's always hard for me to ask money, but then one of my board members, who's a ranchero de la frontera, me dijo, no tengas pena, María. No estás pidiendo dinero para ti. You're asking for money to do good journalism in the United States of America. So go and make the phone call, because I really don't like to make those phone calls and ask for money. But I understand I'm doing it for you. And the cool thing is actually foundations love it when our individual donations increase, because it doesn't really matter. I know oftentimes I'm like, no, but I can't give a lot. It doesn't matter. It's that you're giving. That's what matters, because that's what we can say. Our individual giving, that's what it's called, our individual giving went up by 200% in the last year. And people aren't saying, well, was it donors who donate over $100 each time? No. So please, whatever you can, as little as you can, it makes a big difference. So do contribute. That's what the envelopes are for. So I'm supposed to say, join people like Ray Roselle, who's supporting our independent media. Ray, are you here? Okay, well, we just called you out because you support us, so thank you so much. Okay, our hashtag School to Prison. We're going to begin with a performance today by Baktun 12. They're a story-based community engagement and cultural programming group that forges alliances with local organizations to ensure the stories, voices, and creativity of East Salinas shine bright. Please, please, please welcome Baktun 12 for a performance of School to Prison. Gracias todos. Baktun 12.
Projected prison forecast. Prearranged. take so much of their lame old power trips. Neta, eh? But don't let me bore you with my story, because history is getting repeated as we speak with my kids, Itzpa and Norby.
AKA Psycha and Little Psycho.
It's Itzpa Pola y Norberto. You see how they don't want to see or feel? Just break and steal our nuestro espíritu en vida? I swear my baby mama hizo lo que podía, but after being laid off, I couldn't find another job, and sin inseguranza, I had to start pushing some drugs. And now after all that, I thought my baby mama would hang, but felt the party took her away from the pain. And now after all that, I got popped, and when this game caught up to me, I got popped and got
lost in the dust. And moving right along, meet Itza, aka La Psycha, our first witness to come to you from.
You know where? Dang.
She loves her flaming hot Cheetos and
her cell phone.
But I hate this school, and you would too. And they had you on this stuff, feeling trapped, never really ever learning jack.
But weren't you doing art, man?
Yeah.
Then tell me what happened to that.
The school ran out of money, so they cut creative crafts. I made it all really, really bad, like these lunches and these books. Dang, no place to sit. Me tienen toda aburrida, just trying to find a salida, acting like they're teaching us something, but really, we're not learning nothing. Hey, pero hay niñas.
What? What's up?
Who here wants to cut?
Nosotras, nosotras. Hey, young lady, just where do you think you're going?
And mijo, desde la primera vez, first day of kinder.
And he was breaking the rules.
Okay, boys and girls, welcome to your first day out. Hey, put that down right now. But they're the ones who started it, teacher. My name's Miss Masemo. Get it right. You're here to learn and not play games, so. But teacher! Talking like that is gonna make me snap, kick you out of my class, and put you on a track. A track?
To where?
To another class.
Or another school.
They atrasan by holding you back a grade or two, so there they go, following your every move.
Oh, hi. Welcome to our class. We're gonna place you right over there.
Where? In the back
of the room on a broken chair.
Security! I need security in room 23. But they're the ones who started it, teacher! Not me! Not me!
You say the same old thing. Esperando different results.
You know what they call that?
Insanity!
So on a day just like any... Pero cheque el sistema.
It's a school to prison people.
Pumpkin todos los gozos.
And all the
traviesas.
Profiling lifestyle. So what? I don't care.
Suspendiéndote for those colors and those numbers. You forgot we're even there.
So on a day just like any other day,
The society's least prioritized subject
has been subjected to
school-aside.
School-aside is a condition.
That's one within the last 3 decades for the Western Law for Public Education.
Has now transformed into a
School to prison pipeline. Will you accept this call for match call private prison facilities?
I accept.
Mijos.
What's up, Dad?
Hey, so good to hear your guys' voices. You know how that makes me feel?
Us too, Dad.
You know I love you guys, right?
We know, Dad.
Y que rezo por ustedes cada día, right?
We know, Dad.
And I'm telling you that
What, Dad?
that from experience
What, Dad?
que quebrar este ciclo. We gotta break this cycle. This vicious
Cycle.
This ciclo.
Vicioso.
This vicious.
Cycle.
This ciclo.
Vicioso.
This vicious.
Cycle.
Y crear un nuevo ciclo. I want us to create a new cycle. Un ciclo.
Saludable.
A cycle.
How cycle?
A healthy.
Cycle.
Un ciclo.
Saludable. A healthy cycle.
Un ciclo saludable. A healthy cycle. Un ciclo saludable. A healthy cycle.
Thank you to Baktun 12 for that performance. We really appreciate that. Otro round of applause, please. So come on stage. This is kind of informal. It's okay. Everybody's sitting around, having drinks and something to eat. Come on in. Your name tags are there. Caleb, you're over here. Debora, there. You're there. Monique, I think you're... Yeah, I think Dan, you're there. Is that right, Daisy? Did you want Dan at the end? Is that okay? Is that right? And everybody can see okay? Daisy, you're going to have a mic with you, right? You have the mic for the audience questions? Okay, we're going to start incorporating the questions from the audience pretty early on. Because, again, if you're here right now, it's because you want to be here. And I'm sure you have something to add, a question or comment. So I see this as a dialogue entre nosotros, and we'll want you to use the mic to do that. So joining me on stage next to me, can you guys see okay? Everybody good? And we're sorry we have to sit so far back from you, but it's because of the lighting, okay? So imagine that we're like really close to you, but we're just a little bit far back. Caleb Martinez is a formerly incarcerated young man who is a student here at UC Berkeley. He's a member of the Underground Scholars Initiative who is co-presenting the event for us. Yeah. Thank you for being here, Caleb. Next to Caleb, Debora Gordon is a teacher in the Oakland Unified School District who has written very publicly about her experience as a teacher. Debora, thank you for being here with us. Next to her, thank you. Dan Losen is the director of the Center for Civil Rights Remedies at UCLA's Civil Rights Project, Proyecto de Derechos Civiles of UCLA. Dan, thank you so much for all of your work. And Monique Rodriguez is a mother of 3, and she's a member of the Colectiva de Mujeres. It's actually a place where these kinds of conversations are happening entre mujeres. So thanks for all of you for being here. Yeah. So I think really briefly, because remember we want to make this a conversation, but I want to ask how all of you came to this. Like, why does this matter, right? I'll tell you. For me, I have been in and out of prisons or jails or detention centers. Never for having been arrested, thankfully, and actually because I had a green card until I was in my late 20s, so I always knew that I could, and this was a long time ago, but I've been visiting people of different sorts in prisons across the United States and in Latin America. And so I've always understood that they are us and we are them. Like this notion that they are different because they are behind bars has never played into my life. So that kind of has motivated me to want to give voice. And when I first heard of the school to prison pipeline, I immediately talked about it with my team at Latino USA and said, we have to be covering this story. And so I do believe that today what we're doing, even though we may feel, here we are in a small campus, over 100 people here, but this is historic. In my view, this is historic to have this conversation. So Caleb, tell us a little bit about but how you get here. What happened? You actually ended up believing that when you were a young person in school, in grammar school, that you felt you were already being prepared for prison. How?
Well, I'd like to take a step back and just ask the audience if they ever heard of formerly incarcerated students at UC Berkeley. If you have, raise your hand. Okay, so there's a reason for that. We're not portrayed in the media, us as formerly incarcerated, as people that could achieve something, and that's also us as a group. Besides my individual experience, I want to talk more of a systemic issue of being in elementary school, middle school, and high school, and what it is for people in a disadvantaged situation. So we're talking about a setting that's very industrialized. They ring a bell. It's very coercive. It's punitive, and especially for students of color and people from disadvantaged backgrounds. So some kids get sent to the counselor's office, other kids get the police called on them. And public schools are overcrowded, outdated, and overpacked. So
can you tell me, so was there a time when you were a little kid in grammar school, where you were like punished for something that you know in another school, in another place, another kid, nothing would have happened?
Well, there's many situations. So my relationships with authorities or with teachers was often a conversation of, you're going to end up dead or in jail. So there was no support system there at all. And there was a lacking of support system at home since I grew up without a father and a single mother who was working 2 jobs. So that speaks more to the systemic issue on how we end up incarcerated from the playground to the prison yard. It's a pipeline. So part of my own individual experience is that I lost a desire to learn from a very early age because everybody always told me, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, you're not going anywhere. Or you're going to end up just like everybody else. So.
And you said that you felt like your teachers had very little tolerance for what? I mean, in the sense of just being a little kid and maybe, what would that look like?
Well, it's even to the point of microaggressions on how you're treated, how you're welcomed to the classroom, and the reactions on what they perceive as bad behavior. So someone that could have done the same thing that I did would get detention or get their parents called. I would get kicked out of the school. So I spent lots of time going from school to school to school. And what that did is I never got to set up a network of support or never got to build any relationships with people from my community.
Okay. Thank you, Caleb. Thank you for being here. Debora, you started writing about this. You are a teacher here in Oakland in the public school system. Why did you decide that you wanted to write about the experience that your former students were having? I mean, you could just be a teacher doing your job, 9 to 5 kind of thing. What made you step out and say, I want to talk about this?
I started at the Oakland Tribune has a project called Oakland Voices. And they encourage us to tell stories that would not normally have found their way into the paper. And I had a student that I knew was in prison. I had actually read about him in the Oakland Tribune. And he was the quote-unquote nice kid. And I was very shocked when I learned he had shot a young girl in the head and had been sentenced to 25 years in prison. And this was immediately before I began Oakland Voices. So I said, may I tell the story of this particular student? And I contacted him and asked if he remembered me, which he did. It had only been a couple of years since I had seen him. And I wound up having an ongoing relationship with him and really wondering what had happened in his life, both in school and outside of school, that eventually led to his having shot this girl in the head. She did survive, but has suffered.
And what did you come away with? What had happened in school that would lead him to this place?
Well, interestingly, I actually spoke to him just yesterday and told him I was going to be on this panel and particularly asked him that question. What could the school have done differently, or did you not feel supported? And he said really that it wasn't that much about what happened in school. I will say his experience in school was probably different from the one Caleb described. He was not a, quote, problem student, whatever that might mean to different people. He was on time, he did his work, he was respectful, he actually performed at a fairly high level. So he said it was just that he wound up joining a gang, and the gang seemed more engaging and more fun and more active than school, which was certainly at a lower level of excitement, I guess you might say. Even though I will say I had him in a program called Independent Study. I was his only teacher except for math, and I always felt he did wonderful work for me, so it's very complicated.
Which puts another question back onto the schools of how do we make the schools more exciting, more interesting, more engaging. I want to come to you, Monique, now to talk as a parent. You had a specific experience with your daughter, right, when she was 5 years old. Can you tell us about that? And also why you formed Colectiva, you helped to be a part of Colectiva, and what is it that you want to share by talking about your story?
Yes, so I had the experience that my daughter was in kindergarten and she had a lot of defiance issues. So she was talking to her friends a lot. She was walking out of class because she didn't want to be there. And then it got to the point where she started kicking chairs. And that's when the principal called me and said, Monique, we need to meet. I need to talk to you regarding your daughter. So I went in and we spoke. And He said, I think your daughter needs to be in school only for an hour a day, only because she's kicking chairs and she can be harmful to others as well as herself. So I was like, okay. So he said that would happen for 6 weeks, and as each week went on, they'd add on an hour each week. So this happened maybe for about 6 months.
Monique, I'm
and-
sorry, who explained this to your daughter? Did they say, you're kicking chairs and therefore now you're only allowed to go to school an hour a day? Did they say that? How did you, or did you have to explain it to her? And how do you explain that to a child?
Well, the principal explained it to me, so then I told her, look, baby, we're going to be going to school for an hour a day. And she was okay with it at the time. She was like, okay. So she went for an hour a day. And like I said, it was only supposed to be for 6 weeks. And it went on for a period of 6 months. And that's when I said, well, it was supposed to be increased each hour. And nothing had happened. She was still an hour a day for 6 months. And then I noticed that she was falling behind in reading. And so then at that time, I was able to help her because I was going to school at the time. So I had to spend extra hours reading with her and stuff at home. And then it came to a point where I was just like, something's not right. Something's not right here. My child is falling behind. And so that's when I went in and was talking to him. And he said, oh, no, it's normal. Monique, it's, we're going to get her back on. So once again, he told me that again. And then I had met with my cousin that works for the LA Unified School District, and she's like, no, Monique, did you sign a contract? I said, no. She's like, that's not right. You need to go talk to the principal and fight for your daughter to be in school. And that's what I had to do. And he was just adamant at having her at an hour. And then I said, well, I'm going to go talk to the superintendent. And at that point, when I said the superintendent, he was just willing to work with me at that point. He said, oh, okay, next week she'll be here 2 hours, and within 2 weeks she was back to full day.
Dan, when you hear this story, I have to say that I don't understand the correlation. I'm having a hard time putting together the sense of a child who's kicking chairs. So I'm not hearing the child is throwing chairs in the classroom and is kicking chairs at kids. I'm hearing a child who's kicking chairs, and the remedy to that is stay out of school.
Makes no sense.
So help us to understand how this can, and frankly, of course, now my blood begins to boil, because I'm like, how did this happen in this school? And the school is essentially not penalized for this. So help us to wrap our heads around this, Dan.
Well, I think there are many schools where either the school leaders or the teachers have not been well trained to support kids and provide the kind of attention that kids need. So kids come from all different backgrounds with all different experiences. Some kids may have experienced trauma. We take, as public schools, they're not private, public schools take kids as they come, and they need to be equipped to help all kids be successful. And what the research says is that removing a kid, kicking them out of school, does absolutely nothing. It's not even an intervention. So it's not helping the child. It's not really helping the school, because the student's going to come back more disengaged, the relationship with the parent more frayed. And nobody's better off. As a society, we're also worse off, because eventually, when we fail to meet the needs of kids, they do wind up in the juvenile justice system. They do wind up on the streets, and we can do better. And that's the other profound thing, is that there are lots of successful schools that would never have suspended her daughter.
How can that help me to understand? You have what, a principal and a vice principal, or I don't know, some other structure that basically says the best punishment we can do is this? I'm trying to understand, is it a systematic? Who's making these decisions? How, is there kind of any overseeing of this? Or does it just happen that someone like Monique feels, oh my God, I guess I've been told to not bring my daughter to school, and I have to kind of follow what I've been told, as opposed to...
Well, there is a right to an education in California. And so when you see a school or a district engaging in a practice or a policy that's not educationally sound, there are recourses in the law. But eventually, and we were talking earlier, we want the educators in that system to change what they're doing, to understand that there are alternatives, that they can receive the training. It's not that, we just fire everybody. There's a lot of work that can be done, and with the right sort of approach, they can help all kinds of kids who come. Some kids come with greater behavioral needs than others, but they can help all those kids really be successful. And that's the point, that there are a lot of schools already out there that are doing this well. And so by shining a light, a lot of the work we do is shining a light on the issue, but also trying to find the schools and districts where they are being successful so that we are better meeting the needs of kids. But and it flows along the lines of race, as well as disability status, as well as gender. So there are civil rights involved as well. It's not just about being better educators. When we see the disparities, when we break it down by Latino kids, English learners, African American children, we see a profound difference. And so part of what we do is shine the light on those differences so we can collectively say, we reject the status quo, we can do better, and kids have a right to much better than what we're providing.
Dan, why is this, out of all of the things that you could have focused on in terms of civil rights in our country, sadly there are many issues, why this issue? Why so deeply? So deeply?
I'm a former teacher, so that, I taught elementary school for 10 years, so I know how good schools can be. So I felt when I went to law school to work on this, and now as a researcher as well, that here's something that I actually know about. So when I'm talking to, say, teachers' unions, I know that there's another way, that it's not an academic idea, that I've actually done it myself. I was also that teacher who was kicking kids out of school, well, not out of school, but sending them to the principal's office, because I wasn't well trained. I didn't have good classroom management skills. But I received the support, and I had a very strong leader who said, you have a classroom management problem, and I had enough support so I could say, you're right. And they had a training program for first and second year teachers, and it made a huge difference. And the other thing that I think is very sort of promising, at least, is when teachers and leaders get the support and training they need, they are more successful. These things, there really is no excuse for kicking kindergartners out of school.
Caleb, I want to kind of know what's going on for you as you're hearing Monique talking about what happened to her little girl, and how it's hearkening back to kind of your own experience. What's coming up for you?
Well, it just kind of reminds me and places me back at that situation where I wasn't given the tools available to be able to succeed in that background. And it just reminds me that I'm not alone in my story, that this is still going on, and it is a vicious cycle.
I mean, how old are you, Caleb?
I'm 27.
Okay. And Monique's little girl is 5 years old. That's 22 years in the interim. And somehow you would have thought we would have made a leap. What would you say to those teachers who see in Monique's little girl, who see in you a problem child because you're, being defiant or kicking a chair? What do you say to them?
Well, I'd like to ask teachers why they got into the business of teaching in the first place. And was it to be an enforcer? Was it to be an authoritative figure? No, it's to bring out the essence of a student and to help them be creative and help them and to empower them. And a lot of times what happens is that people from disadvantaged communities are traumatized from what's going on in their communities. There's what's called a continuing traumatic stress disorder that our people in our communities are facing. And that's from our friends and family being shot, arrested, and placed, their fathers, their mothers being placed in incarceration. So there's not a healthy channel to unleash all this frustration and this trauma. And a lot of times we spend most of our day in school, and that's where its ugly faces surfaces. And they treat that with a very punitive reaction when they should be telling this should be the safe spot for them where they can express these feelings and culture what potential they have. And I don't feel that's what happens in public school. Oftentimes they view a kid that is traumatized as a problem, and they do the same thing that they do to us in the community. They take us out so we don't affect the rest of the society. But that doesn't mean that person can't continue to affect society. If you take somebody out of school, the problem is going to worsen. If you take somebody out of the community, the problem is going to worsen. So you don't ever solve the problem. You're just taking the person out of the situation.
So I want to actually ask somebody to come up to the microphone. Lauren Padilla Valverde, if you're there, where are you? There you are. So I wanted, in talking with Lauren, who is actually also a program officer with the California Endowment, and who's working with a lot of these organizations in Salinas, Lauren's kind of analysis, the arc of analysis, I think was really important for us to have as we dive a little bit deeper and as we open it up to your questions. Lauren, you talked about the school-to-prison pipeline. Really, the overarching theme that you said was we have criminalized poverty, and then the system, in this case the prison industrial complex, can make money off of what ends up happening when at the very base you're criminalizing poverty. So give us the kind of structural, larger picture that you want these people in the audience to come away with, if you wouldn't mind, Lauren. So can you just talk for a little bit about this notion of criminalizing poverty and how the social service institution basically, instead of being a support system, is actually creating a situation where the criminalization of poverty then makes the school-to-prison pipeline actually possible?
Sure. I'll use my own personal experience. I have 3 brothers that came from Guatemala that came here to the United States, and they were undocumented. And they essentially, one of them, because he was undocumented, he got in trouble in school, and he, back when ICE was the INS, was deported back to Guatemala. And so in order to bring him back, my parents, who were both farm work, my mom was a housekeeper, my father was a farm worker, had to essentially indebt themselves, just create more debt for their family to try to bring him back and to try to ensure that he could not be exposed to the gangs that are transnational and bring him back to with us. And the whole process of my parents not speaking the language, not knowing how to navigate the system, it was one barrier after another. And it just sort of like is this landslide of barriers that families are subjected to. And so they try to, in the case of a child who's placed on probation and a single mother has to pay restitution because they're placed on probation, If you're on a salary of $12,000 a year, how are you going to pay that restitution back? And there's no recourse. There's no way to try to
Lauren, hold on a
change
second.
that.
I'm sorry, who's paying who?
When a child is placed on probation, they have to pay restitution. They have to pay probation in the county back for the services that are provided to that young person.
How many of you knew that? Raise your hand if you knew about restitution. Okay, about half of you did. So this is a family being economically penalized for a child who is now on probation, maybe for being truant,
Yes.
for being late.
Yes. And these are the families that don't live in Pebble Beach or here in Berkeley or Rockridge. These are the families that live in the east side, east side of Salinas, who are already working. They're working full-time and are making below poverty wages.
Monique, what's going on for you as you're hearing? Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much for being here and for the work that you do and for sharing your personal story with us. What's going on for you, Monique, as you hear what Lauren is talking about, her own experience and kind of the larger context? Does this make you angrier or more committed to taking on this huge issue?
No, it actually makes me more committed. It brings me to life, I'd say. Only in the sense that, like, when I heard Caleb say earlier that we're pushing out these kids and it's not doing anything, for my child, her father's incarcerated, so he has no out date. So they didn't ask the question, what's going on with your child? Every day when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, this is my reality every single day. And this is why I'm here doing this work, because I don't want my child to fall in that pipeline. And this is why I'm so committed. And this is why I do the work that I do with the Colectiva and why we're advocating, for healing circles so that these children have a safe place to talk about what they're going through.
What made you decide that you weren't going to stay silent? There's so much shame, right? There's not a lot of, it's not like you hear a lot of people saying, yes, my child was suspended. And, you don't, so there's a lot of shame, right, and silence. What made you, Monique, say, I'm going to own my voice, I'm going to talk, and I'm going to organize?
My child. My child is my children are what I live for and why I wake up every day and why I do what I do every single day. And for the next generation, to come. This is why I do the work and why I feel it's so important, the work that we are doing.
So when we've heard this, the term trauma of poverty, toxic stress, it wasn't too long ago, I think even in the world of journalism, that if you talked about trauma and toxic stress, there was almost a sense of like, right. Yes. But now it seems like there is more of a school of thought around how seriously we have to take this. And I'm going to ask you, Monique, to do something. I know it's a little personal, but can you talk to us about how you see this trauma in your school-aged children, how you see it, and how you believe the school doesn't see it?
I feel that they don't see it because I feel like they don't care that my child's dad's incarcerated and that what she's really going through. When I have to hear her say that she's talking to her friends at recess because she misses her dad, or at night when she cries why her dad can't be with her, I feel like to them it's not a big issue for them, or why should they care about that? Why should they care about a child whose father's incarcerated? And for me, I will always care. I will always care for a child who's in any kind of stressful situation or is facing trauma, just because I feel like every child matters, no matter where they come from.
Dan, how do we cross that bridge so that the teachers in this school that we already have lots of questions about can somehow get to a place where they can look at Monique's little girl, whose name is?
Lexi,
and say, I see you, Lexi. I see that you really do want to be here, you want to learn, but that you're sad and suffering. How do we get to that point?
There are actually training programs that help teachers learn how to engage with their students more effectively. And not only does it help reduce the likelihood that they'll kick them out of their classroom, but it also helps improve achievement. So it's sort of part and parcel of good teaching is learning how to connect with the students in a more personal way, and also to be more engaging as a teacher. But part of that is understanding what each child brings to the classroom, what their family situation is like, what their culture is like, and respecting that and prizing that. And in those sorts of classrooms, you don't see kids being kicked out right and left. And so, you know, one of the things I'm really sort of very worried about is some of the folks that are holding on to this zero tolerance mentality the most are some of the charter schools that have broken windows philosophy governing how they're going to do their school environment. So to me, that's just insane, because broken windows is a theory of crime prevention. So it's almost like saying, we think these are young, you know, criminals to be, so we have to sort of enforce every little thing the way this sort of community policing model, which, by the way, the research suggests didn't work, and put a lot of people in prison. So this vicious cycle, now we're bringing broken windows into our schools as a philosophy. It makes no sense, and there's no research to support it. So the good news is more and more the federal government is saying you need evidence-based policies and practices. And when things don't work, and kids with disabilities and Latinos and black kids are getting kicked out of school at much higher rates, well, that's actually against the law. There are laws that say this is unjust and that there are alternatives that work more effectively. So we are obligated, all of us, to do better.
When Dan says it like that it's against the law, I'm wondering how you guys felt about that, because I know I was like, whoa, that's kind of, you know, it says something. And Debora, I want to talk with you about empathy and the importance of empathy, but actually I want to bring in the audience, because I really want you to be a part of this conversation. Remember, Daisy's up here. Does anybody have a question or a comment that they want to share right now before we continue up here? Come on. Okay, here, and then you in the back. Yeah, come. Thank you so much. No, it's great.
As a parent of a chair-kicking child, I want to say I applaud all the chair kickers. Like, if your kid isn't kicking chairs in school, something's wrong with your kid. So, like, we're talking about the school in the school-to-prison pipeline, but the school is not, it's the prison in the pipeline that's the problem. So as long as we love our prisons, we're going to have a school-to-prison pipeline. So can we talk about the problem, which is the prison? The problem isn't the kids. Trying to understand school by studying kids is backwards.
So I imagine you're talking also about the financial incentive, right? The financial incentive in terms of the prisons?
No, well, yeah, I mean, there's that, but so we know prisons don't bring safety, they don't bring health, they don't bring anything constructive, right? So, I mean, this would be a question for somebody on the panel who is still maybe holding on to the idea that we can do prison right. So, I guess if I can make it into a question is, if the prison is the destination, what does it look like if a school-to-prison pipeline if there's no prison at the end of the pipeline?
Okay. Caleb, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that prisons should not exist. If we take a step back and talk about prisons, they've been proven to be ineffective. They've been proven to cause recidivism, and they're very costly. And if you build a prison, it's like the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. They will fill up that prison. They'll continue to fill them up, and it's an education for people to be able to continue a career of breaking the law, because once they are let out, they're not let out with any skills that are going to be transferable to society. And that is why prisons it should be focused on what's the underlying causes of crime, and that's mental health, and that's lack of opportunities. So we need to start addressing that in a more effective way and leave this draconic method of punishment, because it's not giving us, if we're talking about this as a social sense, it's not doing anything for us socially. If we talk about this in an economic sense, it's costing us millions of dollars. And if we're talking about this in a sense of morale, what are we doing when we're locking up all of our children? When we have the most people incarcerated than any other developed country. So I think it's a time to start to rethink what prison actually does for us and start creating a prison to education pipeline that is an alternative method of rehabilitation other than prison.
All right, so I want to, Caleb, thank you. I want to, just so you guys know, and I'm sure many of you know this, but in case anybody is live streaming us, which we know you are, just in terms of there's the human, there's the legal conversation, there's a human rights conversation, there's the poverty conversation. Just think about it in terms of the numbers. For a year locally, the dollar amount for a child in school, $9,000 spent. To keep a person in prison for a year, $180,000. When you think of that, it just begins to sound unreal that the United States of America, in this community, locally, you're spending only $9,000 a year to educate a child and $180,000 to incarcerate. I do want to let you know that any minute now, we should be getting a call. Hopefully, it's going to come through. Actually, Michael, would you just be watching this? Latino USA, if you've listened to us consistently, we have somebody who we're following. His name is Suave. He was sentenced to life without parole when he was 17. He calls us very often. I never know when he's going to call, and today he happened to call when I was on my way here, and I told him that we were doing this event, and he's in prison in Pennsylvania, and he knows what the school-to-prison pipeline looks from the inside today. So he said he was going to try to call us back, and we'll hear from him briefly. But I wanted to ask you, Deborah, if you wouldn't mind bringing it back to the issue of empathy. So we talked money, we talked spend, we talked legal. For a second, let's talk about empathy and what that looks like in a school where, let's try and imagine where Monique's situation is, the response is empathy as opposed to we're pulling you out of school. What does that look like in a school setting?
Well, I will say that quite recently, in the last few years, in particular this year, there's been a move to help teachers think more about how to both model and introduce empathy both implicitly and explicitly in the classroom. So how are we as teachers modeling empathy? So, if there's a student causing whatever may be described as a disruption, and I do want to say classrooms are very fluid, complicated environments. Seeing things from the teacher's point of view might look very different, and I know that it can sometimes be hard to understand that. And just one other really quick side point. High school teachers see 160 students per day. So that's a lot of people to interact with. And just to think about, I want to care and know about each one of them. But it's a lot of people in an hour to get to know them and also have time to teach the lesson, take attendance, and do all these other extraneous
But
things.
in that situation, let's say, where you're like, you're seeing, right? We can see this. This is a child who's acting out, right? What does the opposite of what happened in Monique's situation look like?
I was definitely thinking about if that was happening, in my classroom or in a classroom in our school. And the first thing we're encouraged to do is to actually have what are called hallway talks. So if it's possible, say to the student, hey, could you step out in the hall with me for a moment? Let's just talk, and maybe start by saying, is everything okay? Or I noticed you were, whatever it may have been, whether it's kicking the chair or whatever the behavior is, and say, can I help you with that? Or is there something you need? Sometimes students aren't willing to do that. They just don't want to for whatever reason, but sometimes that can be an entry point to try to resolve the problem. Students will tell us that they are hungry, that they are tired, that something happened in their lives that they may or may not be willing to share with me. It's very common for students to say, I had this terrible morning, or something's going on with a member of the family, things like that. So, we'll start with that. We are really encouraged not to send students out of the room for what are considered more minor behaviors. I'm not sure where kicking a chair would fit in exactly in that kind of continuum of this isn't serious enough to send somebody out to the point where it is, but I really try to, as much as possible, model empathy, and then to also ask students for empathy as well. I will also ask them, what would you do if you were me? If you were the teacher, what would you do? So I'm trying to say, I've been a student. I know what it can be like to sit through a class all day. Maybe you're not always interested. Maybe you're tired. Maybe it's boring to you. But, and I try to see if I can get them to explain to me how they're feeling. But then I ask them, how do you think I might feel, or how do you think your teacher might feel given the situation?
Dan, you're shaking your head. You're like, okay,
Well,
you're liking what you're hearing.
There's a story that juvenile justice Judge Teskey, Stephen Teskey, told to the Senate Judiciary Committee. He described a situation where there had been a trained resource officer who was trained not to just arrest kids, but to find ways to support them. So a high school girl, throws a chair at her teacher. So this is a real story. The teacher calls the SRO. Now, we've seen what happens in some places where even for not putting away your cell phone, a girl was, brutally manhandled and arrested. But in this case, a more empathetic response with a trained school resource officer, they found a place for the girl to quiet down. It took her quite a few hours, and it turned out she had been raped repeatedly by her mother's new boyfriend, and instead of arresting a victim, they were able to arrest a child abuser.
So it can happen, right? There can be a way. It can be learned.
Absolutely.
How do you juxtapose the desire to learn, to be empathetic, to be more understanding, to understand toxic stress, trauma, versus the institutional financial interests that we've been talking about? How do you tip the balance there when there is a financial interest in the notion of companies making a profit off of a body in a cell? How do you put those two things together, Dan, so
I
that
think
we understand kind of how to move forward?
Yeah, there are, I think, two really important things. First, teachers need the support and training. We have to put our resources in California, for example, through the LCAP funds. There's ways to provide resources for teachers, more support personnel, more counselors, special educators, and also well-trained leaders. The research shows that it's really the attitude of the principal. When you adjust for race and poverty and all these things, it's the attitude of the principal that determines whether schools are frequently suspending or very minimally suspending students. But the other thing is, for those who aren't going to be reached in terms of their hearts, the economic realities, we have to make that a little more clear so that politicians and taxpayers know that this is really insane in terms of the economic impact. So we're doing a study on what does it cost to suspend a student. So we can link through research what is the likelihood that a suspended student will drop out, and there's a lot of research on the cost of dropping out in terms of higher rates of incarceration and crime and poverty. So we're showing that it actually comes to billions of dollars a year, and even just being suspended one time can dramatically increase the likelihood that a student will eventually drop out.
So frustrating to hear these numbers. Do we have a question? Yes, we do. Thank you. You guys are great, by the way. You're so attentive. I love seeing an audience like this. You're just like, because I feel we're all learning so much, right? And we're trying to figure out how do we move forward from here. So thank you for your amazing attentiveness. Yes, my love.
Thank you. So we've talked about race a bit, but I think I would like the panelists to delve in a bit deeper into the role of racism and institutional racism in this context. And my question is, what are the explicit and implicit biases that many teachers and school administrators have about Black and brown children that are causing this disproportionate effects in these communities?
Thank you so much for your question. And of course, in my view, I'm always thinking about the role of the media. The role of the media of creating this narrative. But do you want to jump in with that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. So is everybody familiar what an implicit bias is? That's a bias that you're not aware that you have and that you act on. So this is brought to somebody through social upbringing and their experience. So when you're in a position of power, you might be treating somebody a certain way and not even be aware of it. So they can ask that person, they can ask themselves, no, I'm not racist. No, I don't like make any distinctions. But there has been studies that people take an implicit association bias test, and most police officers, most authority figures have an implicit bias. Most of us do have an implicit bias. So that's a matter of fact. When it comes in a classroom setting, as a student of color, you don't see people like you in positions of power. You don't see your teachers being people of color. You don't see the principal being people of color. So when we're talking about something like empathy, if the person that is teaching, if the person is in charge doesn't even know the situation that you're coming from, that is a breeding ground for these implicit biases and these explicit biases. So it's to a point where they're so detached of what reality is going on, they're more concerned of test scores than whether if this child has the basic needs, like she's talking about, like you were talking about kids that are starving, or kids that are food insecure, kids that are resource insecure. How is this kid expected to learn and to behave when they don't even have their basic needs met? So I don't want to get into the idea that school has all the solutions. School is being faced with these problems because we have a societal problem that we don't invest in disadvantaged communities.
Right, and of course, again, for me, it's the notion of how does the media play into this? So just so you guys know, actually, even though our country has become more diverse over the last 25 years, the diversity in America's newsrooms has actually decreased. Even though we've become more multicultural, actually, as you know, because we just all witnessed it by watching the Oscars, much of Hollywood, etc., has become less diverse. Okay, we have a call from Suave, so we're going to put Suave on. Is he there now?
And monitoring. To accept this free call, press 1. To refuse this, thank you for using Securus. You may start the conversation now.
Hey, Suave?
Yes?
Suave, so we're sitting in front of an audience of about 100 people here on the campus at UC Berkeley. We're on...
How many people?
About 100.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to just, if you wouldn't mind, Suave, can you tell us from your view, what you're seeing now at one of the largest state prisons in our country, what does the school-to-prison pipeline look like for you today?
Well, today, first of all, my name is Luis Suave Gonzalez. I've been incarcerated 30 years since the age of 17. I came here to Grateful Prison, the 6th largest prison in the United States, with an IQ over 56, they didn't know how to read or write because the school district in New York, at a very age, they said that I was mentally retarded, and they put me in special ed classes, and I ended up in prison. And what you see today in this prison in Grateful is a shame. It's a shame because we're seeing a lot of young kids, 18, 19, 17 years old, coming in here straight without even finishing high school. And a lot of these kids are ending up in here because the schools in Philadelphia are writing these reports that they're calling these kids incorrigible. So these kids are being placed in these special schools, trouble schools, and from trouble schools, they act up and they end up in prison with criminal charges.
Suave, is there a particular case of anyone who you've seen recently that you were able to understand, like the suspension from school that then basically led them to then the path to incarceration? Is there a story, somebody who you met recently, or?
There's hundreds, but I know one in particular that I'm helping right now. I don't know if I can say his name, but it's a Spanish kid out of Philadelphia. He was caught in the Philadelphia school with a stick of marijuana. Now, keep in mind that marijuana in Philadelphia is legal now. They give you a citation if they catch you with it in the street. But since he was caught in school, he was given a charge. He was placed on house arrest. He violated that house arrest for cutting class, hanging out with some girls. He ended up in prison. Now you got to do a 1 to 3 years in state prison. He just turned 18 years old. And I'm sitting here wondering, what the heck is this young kid doing in prison for a stick of marijuana when it's legal in the city of Philadelphia and they give you a citation? So, that's just one example of what's going on with our school system.
Suave, if you wouldn't mind, on a daily basis, how many young people are you seeing coming into the prison at Graterford? On a daily basis.
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Graterford. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
Being though that Graterford is the classification center for the state prison system in Pennsylvania, I can see any given time, 3 times a day, anywhere from 400 to 650 newcomers. And most of them are young kids, just turned 18. Some of them are not even 18 yet. So when they come in and they still 17, they keep them locked up in a separate block till they turn 18. Then they cut them loose in population.
But Suave, did you just say that you see sometimes 400 young people coming in on a daily basis?
Oh yeah, that's nothing. That is nothing in here. That's nothing. From 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, all you see is a line of jumpsuits. In each line contain at least 125 to 200 guys going to E block, which is the block where they house the new residents.
Suave, we want to thank you so much. A round of applause for Suave, everybody.
Prison school pipeline is real. I'm a prime example of that.
Thank you, Suave, for all that you do. I'm going to tell the audience here exactly what you do, and thank you for calling back, and we really hope that you have a good day today, and we hope that the next time that this audience knows about you, it's when we're able to say that Suave has been released from prison. So have a good day today, Suave, and thank you so much for sharing your information with us.
Same to you. Thank you.
So Suave, when Michael Simon Johnson and I went to interview Suave inside the prison, that was one of the moments that was pretty incredible, was to see the line of new inmates. And as you heard, 400 on a daily, not rare. What's going on for you, Caleb? As you heard, Suave.
A lot of flashbacks, a lot of feelings of how wasteful this is. When you're talking about all these young lives and the potential that they have, you have to see that potential as the same potential that is at this university. It's people that have the capability to make new forms of energy, to be engineers, to be doctors, to be lawyers. And as a student who's formerly incarcerated and now at UC Berkeley, I have to tell you one truth, that the smartest people are not at UC Berkeley or in these institutions, they are behind prison walls.
We have another question. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have a question. Yes.
My question is in terms of how do we shift the culture of seeing a school to prison pipeline in terms of like the end pipeline, once people land there, is done. You know, they have no more future. There's no way to change them. Because a lot of times people see like, let's work on the young people before they get to this pipeline, because once they get swallowed up, it's a wrap, you know? And how do we change that, you know? Because I know the underground scholars, we're working on a prison to school pipeline, you know, to kind of shift that, so that's not the end goal, but a lot of times when you have a conversation, the prison to school pipeline, you know what I'm saying? I mean, the school to prison pipeline, you already think, let's prevent them from going there, because once they get there, it's a wrap, you know? And so that's kind of my question for the panel. And also, like, Caleb, I know you're also a parent. Can you talk about your experience as a former incarcerated student, but also a parent as well?
Thank you so much for that. I did want to tell you that Suave, who, as you heard, was illiterate, and that's why he didn't take the plea. He would have been out, but he didn't understand what it was. He was illiterate. Suave learned how to read when he was in solitary confinement for over a year. He was taught by a fellow inmate. Then he taught himself how to read. Then he got his GED. Then it took him 16 years to get his bachelor's, which he got, and we actually have in our office. He sent it to us because he can't keep it inside his cell. And now he's working on his master's. But do you want to answer that question? Dan, I wonder if you want to respond to that question first.
Well, one thing that I was thinking is that there are no throwaway children. And when oftentimes, especially if they're poor or minority, the idea is we can only teach the good kids. We got to, the bad kids, we have to somehow remove them. And I think that's just a broken philosophy, and I talked about the economic costs. One of the big costs we see is with kids with disabilities, who by law, you're not allowed to say we don't educate students because they have a disability. So that's well-established law, but in fact, across all racial groups, they're twice as likely to be suspended from school.
And this was something I have to say, sorry to interrupt you, but reading that statistic just really, how many of you knew that students of color with disabilities are particularly targeted for suspension? How many of you knew that? Okay, not a lot. This is, to me, kind of shocking. Can you paint a picture, Dan, of what this looks like,
right.
actually?
Well, so at the secondary level, it's even worse. So elementary is, there are some pretty awful things happening, but at the secondary level, if you're a Latino male at the secondary level, about 1 in every 4 Latino males, 23%, were suspended at least once in just 1 year. So what happens is also for kids with disabilities, they're getting counseling, they're getting other supports and services, as well as academic special education, academic specialized support in that realm. And so the impact of being removed from school where there's no education, and we're talking about short-term suspensions. If it's a long-term suspension, if you're a student with disabilities, you're supposed to be educated somewhere, whatever the new setting is. But what happens is they're suspending kids with disabilities short-term at incredibly high frequencies, and even in the county office of education schools run by Merced County or by Los Angeles County, the suspensions per 100 are 50 to 100 suspensions per 100, and it's even higher than that. That's for Latinos. For kids with disabilities, it's even higher than that. So the specialized schools where kids with discipline issues or special ed needs are supposed to get a little bit more and specialized interventions, they're getting less. They're getting kicked out of school even more often. It's insane.
How did the whole thing about suspension, I mean, I remember when, a million years ago when I was young, that the suspension, there were very few that happened in my school in the south side of Chicago. It had to be a very high bar. What happened with this high bar of suspension that suddenly now, and what does that look like, Dan?
Well, I think, as I was mentioning earlier, there was this importation of the war on drugs mentality into our schools, that we have to, kick kids out for every little offense and, just be tough. The tough on crime somehow got insanely translated into being tough on kids and tough on children. So, and when people are trained or when that's supported, and then you have also under-resourced schools. So, I have empathy for teachers who are not trained, who may not, know how to interact in a more effective way, and they're feeling stressed out and they're underpaid. And so they're thinking, and if they don't realize the repercussions, the negative repercussions of sending a student out, they might think, well, at least I get a little reprieve from the chaos that I'm being, handed. And so it is difficult, and that's why we have to be supportive of teachers to help them, find more effective ways.
And you believe that these teachers can effectively be trained.
I was one of them. So I did, absolutely. I mean, people don't go into teaching thinking they're going to just teach the good kids. Maybe private schools are for that. For public school teachers and principals,
Don't get me started on private schools. And actually, I mean, that's just a whole other thing, which is just a very different slippery slope of another kind. Another question. Yes, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Luis. One thing to add is that with this new accountability era, teachers are also pushing pressure on the results in their classroom, so they're having to suspend more kids or get them out of the classroom so they can, get the test scores to the level where they need to. So that's a huge thing. But we're hearing a lot about the causes and the problem. But it's hard to find kind of like some of the most concrete solutions, right? We hear things like restorative justice, training of teachers, but I feel like that's a really passive way and very slow way of dealing with sometimes thousands of school districts to be able to do this. Like, why don't we set a goal of saying 0 suspensions in our school districts? Why don't we say, let's stop this and solve the issue in a different way rather than waiting for the training to happen? Because we've seen it in standards, we've seen it in accountability, and it just doesn't happen.
And how do you imagine that, like, for example, 0 tolerance on suspensions, let's get to a 0. How do you imagine that that's happening? Are you saying you want parents to get involved?
Well, both. I think it's the school districts are very good at setting academic goals. It's time for us to set social goals too and say, let's stop suspensions. Let's say we're going to get to 0 by year so-and-so, right? And let's find the solutions that we're talking about here to train teachers. But if we don't start by goal, it's just wishful thinking. And I think that's where we are right now.
And what do you do?
I'm a family engagement expert
a family
engagement expert, so I do community organizing with families around the country.
Okay. What do you think about that?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think absolutely we have to take some very strong measures, and that, in fact, in California, they eliminated for grades K through 3 the use of suspension for willful defiance. And I think, unfortunately, you're going to have teachers who are saying, you're not giving us any other tools to work with. And so I've always said in response to the teachers, we have to start somewhere. So you can change the policy, but it should be followed with the resources and the support for teachers. But it's also a myth that it's either suspend kids out of school or do nothing. So that's often, there's a lot in between that teachers can do. And they may not use all the things in between if we allow them to just suspend kids right and left.
So let's talk about, for a moment before we take our next question, restorative justice. Can you see a situation where Lexi, 5 years old, kicking a chair, somehow, even in that situation, there would be a conversation about restorative justice that might then keep Lexi in the school, in the classroom?
Oh, absolutely.
What would that look like?
Well, it depends, I don't know. First of all, if I was the teacher, I would hopefully know her and her parents. It might involve, it depends on how amenable she is to moving to the side of the classroom to have a conversation. It may mean that I'm part of a team and I can call in a student teacher or a counselor to help work with her in the classroom so that I'm not, stopping everything in the middle. So there are a lot of choices that don't involve kicking her out of school, certainly. And that's the other thing. There are other supports. Some kids may have special needs that aren't being addressed. So there's kids who get over-identified, who get labeled disabled and removed, and that can exacerbate problems. And in some school districts, they're shortchanging kids who really do have disabilities and not meeting their needs, and there's insufficient special ed supports. And sometimes we see in large districts, it could be both going on. So,
Monique, did you want to jump in, or are you okay?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. Just want to make sure that you have a voice. I do want to bring in, because we've got great questions. So maybe we'll take one after another. We'll take your question and another question, and then because I want to make sure we get all of your questions in.
Okay. My name's Jose, and we've heard a lot about the different problems, and I'd like to applaud the panel. I think we got a great set of perspectives. And I think poverty looks a lot different today than it did maybe 50, 60 years ago. And I think we underestimate how few meaningful relationships kids have with adults these days. And in regards to our schools, I think Dan made some good points about training. But no matter how much training we provide, we still have very stressed out systems in schools. So you could be the most caring teacher in the world, And the pressure of teaching so many kids and having to know so many stories, especially in highly traumatized communities, will render you ineffective at some point. And so I would like to hear from the panel about what you envision if the resources were put where they needed to be. Because as you talked about, Maria, $9,000 a year to educate one child, that is pennies. We should be investing a lot more. If we had the money, what would that look like? And I'd really love to hear from Monique about what a supportive school would look like for her child, and what sort of, how she would feel supported and how she would think her child would feel supportive.
Thank you so much for that. That's a great question. We'll come to the answer, but let's take another question real quick so we know. Maybe we can answer them. Yes, thank you so much.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is George Villa. I'm from East Salinas, and I just want to also applaud you guys for your great work. I'm also an individual who's been through the school to prison pipeline. At an early age, I was suspended for throwing paper, writing notes, passing notes, something through it. I got into a school fight at a young age. I mean, who hasn't had to like push and shove at the playground? From then on, I was put on probation. You know, second year in test of marijuana, being late for school, I was sent to a group home, separated from my family. And I think that the problem, you know, and I take full responsibility for what I did, but the problem that was never, you know, or the issues that weren't addressed to me were like childhood trauma. What happened to you as a kid? Things like, you know, was there a father around? Was it, you know, divorce? Mother treated violently? Things like lead to these type of, you know, problems. And, you know, what happened to me, what changed my life were, you know, programs like the California Endowment, who identified what trauma is from the beginning, the root causes. And, you know, made me feel like I had value, like I mattered to something like that. Now I'm a full-time college student. You know, I bring a lot to the table in my community where I'm from. People listen to me more because I've been there, and I can gravitate more towards what these youth are going through. You know, they made me feel like I matter more than the program or the buildings that they're in. And I think that's the solution for these youth. My question is, how important do you guys think it is for people who have been formerly incarcerated and understand the pipeline? How important is that to the table and the work that you're doing?
Thank you so much for your question, and congratulations for all your hard work. We're really proud of you. Monique, how about if you jump in first to that amazing question?
So I think it's a lot of supportive organizations that'll help, whether it be restorative justice, healing circles, art, or theater work. You know, my daughter loves art. Her outlet is art. She loves doing arts. And she also loves horseback riding, you know, so just advocating for more things for our children at the schools, obviously investing more in the children and spending less in corrections.
Caleb, the second question, and I wanted to ask you actually to speak a little bit more about the work that you're doing here with your underground scholars. I'm imagining that you are active on campus, but do you feel like the campus knows that there are many of you here on this campus?
Well, our relationship with the campus is fairly new. We are a 2-year-old organization, and to talk about the work that we're doing, we're the only people doing the work that we're doing. And to see how many people raise their hands at the beginning of this conversation on the knowledge of the work that we're doing, we're talking about formerly incarcerated people at the #1 public institution of the world. How come nobody's heard about that? So to speak more on the work that we're doing is we're trying to wash away the stigma of being formerly incarcerated. And what is a stigma? It's that weight that we carry and the way that we're looked at by society. So if you lied to me one time, is it okay for me to call you an ex-liar or a liar your whole life? But if I commit a crime, you're gonna call me an ex-criminal my whole life, and you're gonna deny me of my basic human rights? We're talking about human rights issues. We're talking about access to an education. We're talking about access to housing. We're talking about access to food and an access to move freely. So you're denied that once you're labeled a criminal. So we're trying to wash away that stigma, but also we want our own people at the table while making decisions. So let me talk about the history of underground scholars. It started as a group on campus that faculty supported as a reading group. And they started to notice that the material that they were reading was not written by formerly incarcerated people. So that began to raise a question, why not? There's some of us that are graduating from one of the best institutions of the world. Why are we not at the table when this literature is being written? Why are we not at the table when public policy is being written? Why are we not brought into the conversation? Why are people being paid to give their expert opinion when they've never been in that situation? It's like if we were talking about women issues and it was only men deciding women issues.
We have no idea what that looks like.
So in terms of policy, we're working right now to ban the box at UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley employs about 20,000 people, and it's a big employer, but they still ask the question if you have been formerly incarcerated, which is a deterrent for people that are looking for work. So we're looking to push policy in that way, and besides that, we're looking to reach inside of prisons, juvenile halls, and inside of our own community and get more people to this position. And we do that through outreach and our concurrent enrollment program. So somebody from a community college who's been formerly incarcerated or somebody that is currently incarcerated can take a class at UC Berkeley and see themselves be successful at one of the top institutions of the world. And the ways that caused for that person's own personal story, it could change their entire life. So that's the work that we're kind of pushing here for Underground Scholars.
And of course, Underground Scholars is going to be on Latino USA, so there will be a national story about you guys. Just saying. That was a commitment that we just made, because we can. Am I right? Right? Yeah. My team is like, yep. So Underground Scholars will be featured on Latino USA coming up, because we can, right? Because we're making the decision. Debora, I know you felt, it seemed like you wanted to jump in. Now, am I right?
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about repurposing of resources, particularly financial ones. The figure that you quoted, $180,000 a year or so to keep people incarcerated, that could very well be spent by just adding more teachers in each classroom. If I could have, or if teachers could have a partner, a co-teacher, instructional assistants are also wonderful to have, but it would be great to have an instructional assistant and a co-teacher. And if we could drastically reduce the number of students per class. I did teach in the independent study program for 10 years, and there are many students who I had an excellent relationship with, but I thought, that's because this student gets my undivided attention for an hour, which isn't that much time, but nevertheless, my undivided attention as a caring adult for every single week. And many students would come in and literally sit down and start crying as soon as they got in the chair, because I was the one person who was going to really listen to them. And I didn't always have solutions, but at least they knew I could hear them. So I would love to see classes, people say small class sizes are 25 or 20. I say 8 students or if we're going to keep them even at 20, let teachers have a co-teacher. That alone would reduce so many issues. There's so many things that a teacher does besides just instruction, and wanting to develop that rapport with teachers. One thing I was able to do in independent study was when I would know a student, I would know their dog's name, their grandma was coming to visit, their older married sister was having a baby that they wanted to be, whatever their career goals were. It's very hard to know that, and that is one reason I think many students wind up getting into trouble, that they will say to teachers, you don't care. But I really do feel most teachers really do care, and the complexity of the job that teachers are asked to do today is beyond the scope, I think, of what many people understand. Delivering the content is such a small part of our role, but I also want to say that there are many resources being provided to students today. I don't know that they've been as impactful as we'd like, but our students can get 3 meals a day at our school. They can get counseling. Many schools have a health clinic on site. So schools are providing a lot more services than, quote, just education.
Well, the
It's
point
important
is
to realize that.
Kind of working at it, that there's a good opportunity, right? That it isn't that teachers want to go in necessarily to be the authoritarian figure, right? That we start from the point of maybe they really do want to deliver their best and give their best. And I will tell you, because I'm also a professor, I know you're like, wait a second, don't you run a company and you do Latino USA? Wait a second, and you're a professor. I'm Mexican, I never say no to work. So they were like, can you teach? I was like, yeah, I can do that. But it has offered me the opportunity in Chicago at DePaul University to be a professor in the Latin American Studies department. And what you said, Debora, so often my students, many of them first gen, will just walk in, because I actually mandate, as a professor, I actually mandate one-on-one time. It's like it's part of you have to do it or else you won't. It will be a detraction on your grade. Because I want to make sure that the student can look at me and I can look at the student, if even just for 15 minutes. And sometimes all they'll do is they'll just say, I just wanted to come in and cry. And that's important, if even just to see them and to feel like the trauma is a little bit less, just a little bit less because they were hurt. This is so wonderful. Yes, we're going to take another 2 questions.
Hi, everyone. My question is really about gender and racialized gender. My name is Aldo Gallardo. I am a non-binary trans Latina. And when I wanted to address how we can expand and complicate the conversation on gender. So when we talk about boys and men of color, we also talk about trans boys and trans men. When we talk about women of color, women and girls being impacted by the school-to-prison pipeline, we talk about masculine-presenting girls, self-identified marimachas, trans women and trans girls, and also for the non-binary youth, femmes and youth that identify as masculine of center. How do we expand this conversation and complicate it, and also advocate for the people in the room and the folks listening and on the panel? How do we advocate for all youth of color, specifically trans, gender non-conforming, queer youth of color, and to help them abolish the school-to-prison pipeline?
Can I turn the question on you?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you think should be done?
Yeah, so I have the privilege to work at GSA Network. We're a state, local, national organization, and we uplift the voices of trans, gender nonconforming, and queer youth of color that are impacted by these symptoms of oppression, right? White supremacy, cis heterosexist patriarchy, capitalism, and the gender binary that are being impacted, and we're often left out of these conversations. So as an adult ally, I help them uplift these voices and help them organize.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to jump into, and also, thank you for that question. We're going to take another question and then we'll answer both of them. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Hold on, we'll take another question, yes.
Hi, my name is Armando Hernandez, and when I think of the school-to-prison pipeline, I think about the turning point. I think about the point when the student deviates towards that prison entry up to the point of no return. And I know that in the local, state levels, there have been ways to combat this, primarily through intervention programs like gang prevention programs or drug prevention programs. And I was in one of them when I was in school, and most of my friends have benefited from those. But I lost track of those. So I wanted to hear from Debora and Dan in particular, the educators, and see what their thoughts were on how effective these programs are.
Thank you so much, sweetie. I just got to say, I'm so proud of everybody for being here today. You don't know how, this is really great, you guys. Also because given an opportunity to have these conversations on a national level, we're there, right? Always, there's the deficiency, right? We're not showing up. We're here, and seeing this audience, I just got to say, it was beautiful. I'm sorry, that was a commercial for you. Let's answer the questions, please.
I can start by talking about the effectiveness of programs. I think we often talk about the culture of the school, and I'm not necessarily talking about ethnicity, but more the culture of the school itself. When you walk into that school, what does the atmosphere feel like? How many students are wandering around in the halls? What seems to be going on in different classrooms? And changing the culture of a school is a very complex process. Students come in, maybe their siblings went there or they've heard about it, and they already come in with some ideas of what they think it will be like. Teachers also have their reputations, which precede them after they've been there for a year or so. So a program like restorative justice, which I think most teachers really deeply support, it takes a while for it to sort of pollinate out into the community. And I've seen some small changes. I've definitely seen students who I think actually appreciate having a chance, because it is a dialogue a lot of the time. Sometimes it's a circle. The RJ coach may come into a classroom and work with the entire class and the teacher, but sometimes it could just be a conversation between one student and the teacher.
So this person is called the RJ coach in your school?
Yes, and we have, it's a little bit of a fluid number, but I'd say we have 3 full-time people who do it, but we also, sometimes administrators might do it and so on.
Okay. Dan, I wonder if you want to respond, and also Monique, to any of the questions. I want to make sure that your voice is heard on all of this. But Dan, to that point, and also to the question about trans students.
Right. Let me take that one first. So a number of things are happening. So, and I think the person who spoke may be aware of some of these, but one example is that the Department of Ed's Office for Civil Rights is now collecting data not just on bullying and harassment around the issue of sexual orientation. So it's a small step in the right direction instead of just gender or race-based harassment. And we're urging at the state level folks to start collecting, at least from high school students who are self-identified in different ways, to collect that data, because we do know from a lot of the studies, the ones that are out there, that these students do tend to get suspended at much higher rates and kicked out of school and also bullied, or sometimes then they'll retaliate and then they're kicked out for being the bully when in fact everyone was ignoring all the underlying hostility towards them, including some teachers may have. So it's a complicated, because sometimes it's hard to gather that data. We don't have, like we have on race and English learner status and kids with disabilities, we don't have the evidence yet to really show the disparities and what's going on, but we're certainly trying to support the collection of that. And in terms of good programs, I think there are a lot of good programs, restorative practices, there's all kinds of dropout interventions, and one of rather than talk about the details of gang intervention programs, I think a bigger problem is that schools are still spending a lot of money on school police. And oftentimes they're police that are untrained, or sometimes I've heard heads of police in large cities tell me that their worst officers get assigned to the schools. The worst officers.
How many of you had ever heard that? Okay, that's a piece of information that we all need to know, right? That they don't make it, and whether or not there's actual checks onto these police officers that are being hired.
And we have to pressure, I think, even with the spending from LCAP funds, not to be spending money on police when you don't have enough counselors, when you don't have enough special educators, when you haven't provided sufficient training for teachers and for your leaders. So I think it's really important to push back on this idea that we're going to bring more police in the schools and somehow that makes people safer. It actually, the research shows that people feel less safe.
No surprise. Monique, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I went to a state convening conference in the beginning of February, and like he said, one of the men there mentioned how they were afraid to drop off their son because there's a police there, that he has to drop off his son every day to a police officer waiting for him. And I think that programs are important, and but who better than formerly incarcerated so that they can tell their story and be able to share where the system failed them.
So can you just for a second, Monique, you talked about the work that you're doing with your Colectiva, and you talked about the healing circles. You've mentioned it a couple of times. Can you please tell us what the healing circle looks like for anybody who might not know and might be interested?
Yeah, so our healing circles consist of 4 main principles, which is love, dignity, respect, and acknowledgement. And we believe that we carry those principles, and each session is a teaching on each principle, and we're really advocating with the parents and with leaders in the schools for schools, and actually we're going to be starting our first healing circles at one of the elementary schools, so we're really excited about that. We're going to be starting this month.
So does that mean that it will be, yeah, that's fascinating. So is that the whole class? Is it a group of students? What, like, is it the teachers? Like how?
Yeah, so it's going to be offered to students and parents. So it'll be offered for both of them. And then eventually, yes, we would like to train the staff and administration on them too as well.
And it's open to anyone who wants to be a part of a healing circle?
Yes, anybody's welcomed.
Cool. All right. Well, you know what they say, what happens in California, the rest of us and the rest of the country follow. So I'm really looking forward to the time when the healing circles get to New York. Será super abuelita en ese momento, pero bueno. Yes, another couple of questions.
My name is Jim Kirkpatrick, and I'm going to speak with you about an experience that I had as a father in the 80s advocating for my 2 daughters. And then I had it again in early 2000 advocating as a court-appointed special advocate which addressed another pipeline, and that's the foster care system. And so this is to Dan. I'm sure he has all of this at the top of his mind. But when I went to the schools, when my first daughter, we became aware of her having learning difficulties. And the school's response was to pat my wife and I on the head and say, you know, this is very common that parents compare their two children, and when the younger one isn't doing as well as the older one, they think there's something wrong. And the problem is your daughter's just not that smart, and that's really the problem. You've got to learn to accept that. And then we were able to hire a outside evaluator, and we brought that information in, and we presented that information, and they said, again, you're really making a big deal out of nothing. It was then that I went to an organization here in Berkeley, and Dan may be able to tell us more about this, and it's called DREDF, and Disability Rights Education Defense Fund. And they taught me as a parent what letters to write, what forms to put in, that then made the school district jump. And they were then responsive to our request. Then fast forward into 2000, I'm advocating for a young man in a treatment program over in Marin, and I asked DREDF again for help. And I was asking for the court and the school district to provide services, evaluative services, as I would my own child, and that triggered an avalanche of services to help this child. And that child and my children both have differences. Some of us call them learning disabilities, that were interfering with them being able to maximize their potential. And for the young boy over in Marin in the pipeline from the foster system, he was violent and he was heavily medicated, and it could have been, some of his difficulty could be mitigated by the appropriate therapy, not just psychotherapy, but other therapies. So to Dan, where do parents go to get the advocacy support and assistance so that they can come to the school districts and get the education that all children are entitled to?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing with us. Okay, that's a question for Dan. We have another question?
Hi, I'm Chris Macias. I'm actually a second-year teacher, recent graduate of St. Mary's, and I have a question in response to some of the information we've heard about, particularly implicit biases and microaggressions. The time that I spent at St. Mary's, I had the privilege of studying under Professor G. Reyes, a great man who at the time was telling me about how it's important to pay attention to the language that is involved in schools, how his school in particular did away with the word suspension and converted that to temporary exclusion to make it seem, again, more positive. And at the time, it seemed like an insightful notion. It was only shortly afterwards, while I was teaching in Richmond, that reality began to crash in, where I had one of my students, an African-American student, who had been suspended at this point. He was a junior about 30 times in his time at high school, in the same school. And he told me, he's like, I'm done with the suspension. So I'm done with this, I'm over it. And I was like, well, I hope you don't get suspended again, of course, and try to be positive with him. He said, no, I'm done with that word. I didn't really understand what he meant. It's only after a conversation that he told me that he had family that traced all the way back, in this case, to slavery. And he said, well, I had family who was suspended, who's literally suspended. And that word impacted him on an emotional and historical level where he couldn't deal with that word and the tolerance of that word. And I ask to our panel here, what is the importance of changing the paradigm of the language that is involved in school that ultimately does impact the students in ways that we really cannot perceive, in ways that go beyond our understanding, beyond what even new teachers are being taught in what is supposed to be an up-to-date system. And in addition to that, I ask the question, as a teacher who at present has changed schools multiple times, as I've been trying to change the paradigm in my own classroom, but not seeing the effect transfer into the entirety of the school, how do individual teachers impact the schools who are implementing these systems of language that ultimately do have degrading results onto our students?
Thank you for that. Who wants to jump in? Go ahead, Caleb.
Thank you for your question. I think you raised a really important part on language and how language is so powerful. And it's often been used to dehumanize people and how that can have residual effects in somebody's life. I'm Native American, and I still have to turn on NBC and see Sunday Night Football, and it'd be a game of the Redskins, which has been historically historical word to dehumanize people. And when we talk about people in these schools, the language that we use, whether it be minority, that's a dehumanizing term. Whether it be ex-felon, ex-convict, that's also a dehumanizing term. So for what schools in the community to do is realize that this language was set in place to do exactly what it's doing. And that's to dehumanize, and that's for others to view as that person as not an equal, and for that reason, they can treat them as not an equal, and they don't get equal treatment, equal education, equal access to mental health and medical health. So language is something very powerful, and when you're labeled from a child all throughout your adolescence as a criminal, as a thug, as a prisoner, this has a lot of mental effects on an individual, and it keeps them from self-actualizing and for them to say to myself, you know what, I am a human being, I have as much capability as anybody else in this world, and it just needs to be fostered. So it's a very dehumanizing process to refer to people as labels and this whole process of dehumanization. So that's something I just would like to echo.
So at the Futuro Media Group, actually, my staff all knows we don't use the term minority. In our reporting, you won't hear it on the air. And we don't use the term illegal to identify immigrants, because we believe that words actually have weight. Did you want to jump in, Dan?
Just on the quick legal question, well, there's a whole coalition, Fix School Discipline, in California. There's coalitions of advocates like the ACLU and Public Counsel and DREDF and a lot of legal services providers, and there are probably others who I'm probably leaving out, and they're linked with community groups as well. So there are parent groups that can also help locate the kind of support network that you need, and those differ depending on where you are in California, but also nationally. And there are national groups like Dignity in Schools and NAACP and NAACP LDF and MALDEF, and that are working on these issues on a federal level to ensure that there's more of a federal enforcement role as well. So there's a lot being done, and depending on the context of what the issue is, there are legal recourses, but ultimately we're talking about changing the policies and practices in our schools. So we're not just talking about punishment, we're really replacing what is going on that's not working with more effective practices. And teachers feel much relieved when they learn how to do things better.
You know, we haven't touched on it, but I know that we at Latino USA are thinking about it a lot, right? So it's the school to prison pipeline, but we also know that there's the school to prison to immigration detention to deportation pipeline, right? And that's also, as you know, more money is spent right now in immigration detention enforcement and deportation than all federal law enforcement agencies combined. So the process of actually, as we discuss mass incarceration, we have to also look at what's happening with immigrants in detention, one of the fastest growing groups of people that are growing behind bars, many of them Latino. Let's take another 2 questions. What time are we ending, you guys? Or are we just gonna because, you know, this is fascinating. What's our?
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Adelita Gonzalez, and I'm a mother of 3. I have 2 adult children, one of whom is incarcerated now, and my 3rd child I'm homeschooling because I do not want him to be subjected to this system. And I think it's very important that we remember that this is a system, and this is not a system that is failing. This is a system that is working as planned, as set out, and as set forth. This system, the prison industrial complex system, the economic racist system, the environmental racism that we're all subjected to, this is a system. And I guess my question for the panel and also for everyone in this room is, How long are we going to sit by as Latino, as African American, as queer, not minorities, but people who are subjected to this system? How long are we going to sit by and not be involved in the political process? How long are we going to sit by while candidates, like last night we viewed Hillary Clinton said that the prisons for profit, the tough on crime bills that she lobbied for during Bill Clinton's administration were a mistake? How many mistakes are we going to stand by and keep accepting these establishment candidates? How many mistakes are going to affect how many millions of people? There are 5 million people in this country on probation or parole right now. Each one of them has to pay monthly at least $300. This is a system that makes money for people, and it works. So how do you, the panel, see the presidential candidates in terms of having an effect on this system? And how can we utilize our votes to best address trying to take down this system from the head?
Thank you so much. And it is important. It is important to note that because of the activism on campuses around divestment from private prison industries, Hillary Clinton's campaign said that they would no longer take contributions from private prison companies, but she did. And I don't know about the other Republican candidates for sure, but the issue of bullying is something that I think a lot about in terms of how, the personas that we're seeing on the campaign trail and how we as people who are educating interpret the bullying into our own lives and the spillover. But thank you for that question. Let's take another question.
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm a speech language pathologist working in the school, so I'm part of the team that works to really cheerlead on students, really cheerlead my teachers, really build and really invest in my kids and really invest with the parents and invest in the teachers, because I am a part of that IEP team. I really feel that I am doing something positive. I feel like I am supporting my students and doing it right because my heart is with those students. So it really makes me sad to hear about this pipeline happening, especially in the Latino people of color community. But I think we need more people that speak Spanish, that speak Chinese, that speak other languages out in education, especially special education, supporting our students. So my comment is to really get people inspired about schools, because if we want to change it, we need to change the school system. Thank you.
Thank you. Big questions,
yeah.
big issues. Go ahead, Dan.
It's easy for me to say maybe as a white male, but as much as I do worry about the systemic nature of things, I also believe that there are good people who are teachers, who are administrators, that are already doing some good things. There's a superintendent, McFetrich, in Alameda, for example, and he went in to become a superintendent after being an educator in the prison system, after learning about teaching inmates to read and feeling impassioned that the current system is totally broken. And now he's a leading superintendent, and they're making really important efforts in that school district. So I think we have to, I don't assume that all school districts and all teachers are somehow irrevocably involved in the negative side. I do believe that we can flip it, and it comes with good education, good research about what works, but shining a light on the injustices, shining a light so that everyone in this room can say, we reject the status quo, this is totally unacceptable. And voting is critically important. And so part of education is educating folks so that they are productive and voting members of our society.
So how many of you are going to vote? Raise your hand if you're going to vote. Okay. I would say that that's a majority. Mm-hmm. So your only job is to bring another 10 voters with you when you go to the polls. That's all. Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes we hear that the resistance, sometimes where there is resistance, is from the school board. I've talked to superintendents who are worried about the changing composition. These are some leaders who are really trying to change things, and then there'll be a movement to replace the superintendent. because the school board composition, and this is, the opposite is true, that there are school boards that even at Berkeley Unified, I know Judy Appel is the chairman of the board, and she's very impassioned about this issue and really pushing forward for changes. So the political structure at the school committee or school board level is really an important place that also people can get involved.
Did you want to jump in?
The main thing I would say is that each school is, in a way, it's like its own little country. And it's everything that's happening there to some degree really depends on who is at that school. It's not just the students, it's also the teacher. And both teachers, students, parents, everybody involved with the school, we all come in with, Caleb was talking about implicit biases, and I think all of us need to be checking ourselves, and listening to ourselves. Someone mentioned something about language, and I think the teachers, we as teachers need to be very aware of the language that we use when we speak to students, even subject matter language sometimes, and to validate, so-called forms of non-standard English, to really include all these things, but to really understand, in listening to a lot of the comments today, part of me felt, I hear, again, a sort of implied negative critique of teachers and a much stronger, I think, explicitly clear critique of schools. And certainly as someone who's been in the schools as a teacher for 25 years, in addition to my own experience, I think schools have an enormously complex task. We have students who come who speak, don't even speak English, let alone non-standard English, who come in with, many special needs, whose parents may or may not have been successful in school themselves. And we really do try to educate and care for, every single student that comes. But it is many things that can impact just what happens during the school day. It could be the time of day, who's in the class that day, the weather, is it the day before vacation, is it the first day back to school? And all of these factors come together, and really, even in the same day, you may teach the same class 4 times, and it could be quite different each time you teach it, just even depending who's in the room that day, or is it right before lunch. But overall, I feel like most teachers really are very thoughtful about, do I want to send this student out of the room? Am I treating him or her unfair because of some implicit bias? I think most of us do ask ourselves these questions and really want every one of our students to succeed. Because to some degree, when a student fails, it is a reflection on the teacher. And I think most of us want to feel that we're doing a really good job. But I do also hear, all these critiques. And of course, I've been hearing them all of the years that I've been teaching. And I guess the last thing I would say is, when we are thinking about the school to prison pipeline, and we are thinking, although many, many students are punished in a very unjust way, sometimes there are good reasons to, send a student out of the room. It's not always the wrong thing to do. There's a whole class full of students. As a teacher, I try to think of all of them. What is the collective need of the class? But the real question is, how do we get people to change their behavior, that they want to change their behavior? And I think any of us who've ever tried to change our own behavior know it can be very difficult to do, even if you're highly motivated. And we want students to really want to feel like they're part of things, but we need to help them get there. At the same time, we have to keep the class going. So I
think tools, though. I think the notion that there are actually tools that teachers could be taught, and if it's handed down from the principal, the superintendent, that there's a sense that there's something that can be done. Although the compañera who posed the question about how do we take on these huge institutions, it does feel quite overwhelming. One of the things that I was going to bring up, just so we don't forget also, is that there are also parents, sadly, who are afraid to go into the school, right? So we are so happy that Monique, was able to engage and say there's something wrong here. But when you have parents who are undocumented, who are afraid to even step foot into the school, and then the children who are, have every right to be educated, are short-shrifted because of the dynamic of fear that has been created in terms of being an undocumented person. You wanted to say something?
I will say that teacher training does not end when you finish your credential program. Almost every school I've ever heard of has ongoing professional development. We have it at our school every single week, so it's not a one-off kind of thing. And one of the more recent focuses at our particular school is on culturally responsive teaching. So they're actually explicitly working with us to examine how do we present material, how do we respond to student behaviors, how do we make it more engaging. I mean, all of these things it doesn't stop once you get your credential. It definitely goes on.
Lifetime learners. Caleb, did you want to jump in?
Well, I'd like to highlight what the first young lady had said, that the system is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, exactly what it was created to do. And you could be an agent that has good intentions and all the goodwill in the world, but if you're working inside of a broken system to begin with, your chances of success are not good. So we have to rethink of changing the system as it is, because if we're talking about a school to prison pipeline, and slavery ended 140 years ago, Native Americans got rights to vote in the 1940s, the civil rights was in the 1970s, and there's still these structural limitations, and there's prison for profit. We're talking about modern day slavery. So it's a direct pipeline into the prisons. So when we're talking about what our values are as a society, that's reflected through our policies. And when we can't afford things like education, and there's no equal access to education, and we're not talking about education reform, that's a big problem. So yes, there could be some waves made in the candidate that you choose. If you want to choose a candidate that wants to work within the current system and you're happy with the current system, then go ahead. But if you're somebody that realizes that there's something inherently wrong with our system, there's something that needs to be changed, and not working within the system and creating new advocacy. So if I could just talk about something about education as something that empowers you, education can bring out the humanitarian in you. It can make you have empathy and put you in somebody else's shoes. And this is critical for development. And if you're being cut off from that, from the get-go, then you don't have the same empathy for your community or even for yourself. So if we're talking about working within the same system, we're gonna see little change because the people that need to be in college are not gonna be able to afford it.
But at the same time, Caleb, I'm just so glad that like you, like Suave, like your other compañeros from the Underground Scholars, that even though the system is there and that is putting pressure on and that everything against you, actually you rose like the phoenix, like all of you have. And so I also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We've got to figure out, this is the long term. And all of us are part of the conversation right now. I mean, this is a moment in history that is fascinating. If there ever was a moment in history when we all have to be engaged, it is now. And like I say to my own students, not to put the pressure of the world on your shoulders, but to put the total pressure of the world on your shoulders. This is our moment. And the whole world literally is watching. I actually wanted to ask Michael, because you've reported on this, whether or not you had a question, or whether or not you had a question, Daisy. This is also a personal issue for you. Before we wrap up, to my two producers, anything you want to bring up? You have to come, you know better than to not speak into the microphone, Michael. Simon Johnson.
I don't necessarily have a question, although my thought might form into one. But I am, having reported on these issues for a little while now, I am aware that in most, there's probably a better word for this, but in most success stories of people who have either made it out of the school-to-prison pipeline at some point, or who have come out of prison and have successfully stayed out of prison and have sort of turned their lives around, I'm very aware of the fact that in almost every case, it always comes down to some one person, maybe more than one, but at the very least one person that they can point to and say, I wouldn't be doing this, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this person. If it hadn't been for that teacher, if it hadn't been for this, individual. I think for a lot of people who have no, who have no point of entry to the school-to-prison pipeline, which includes someone like myself, I think those people tend to be, maybe they're your parents, or maybe they're your grandparents, or maybe there's someone who's very direct in your life. And so it's hard for me to say, I know who that person is, but if you don't have that person in your life, it then becomes very easy to look back and know who that person is. So I'm very aware that it always comes, at least in my experience, it seems to always come back to someone. And I guess maybe I would ask Caleb, maybe I would ask you, maybe I would ask everyone, if you agree with that, if you feel like it takes an individual, and as much as we need to change certain systems and as much as structural barriers need to be removed, that the person-to-person element of it is in my eyes, seems to be really crucial.
Yeah, I think that you brought up a very important point, but I just wanted to bring something to light here of underground scholars and the people that we are. A lot of people like to put us on a platform and say, look at this great story, look at what they did, look at how they rose from the ashes. But we'd like to argue that anybody provided with the same opportunities and the same resources can accomplish the same thing. So we don't want to put ourselves on a pedestal, and we realize that the privilege that we have of being here and the opportunities that we were given. As far as my own personal story, I didn't have any family support throughout my adolescence and in my early adulthood. It didn't come until I got into college and I took a class in humanities that I was actually looking to get my degree in computer science because I thought I could email and that would be a career. But she actually pulled me to the side and asked me what my major was. I told her computer science, and she said, well, why do you want to do that? And I said, for money. She said, well, you're very intelligent. You have very great ideas. What else can you be doing? And what would you do if you could do anything and not fail? And I said I would like to advocate for my people and become a lawyer one day. And she was the first person to look me in the eye and say, you can do that, and I'm going to help you get there. So it does take a person to care about you. And one person caring about you can make a complete difference in your life. So there is some emphasis on that. But to mention, I was lucky. And a lot of us don't get that one person that cares about us. And that's where the system kind of fails.
Thank you, Caleb. Monique?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Caleb on that. Just there are people that fall through the cracks where they don't have that one person in their life, which is why implementing other type of programs for them that could help out in the process is useful for that. And
just want to add.
I actually wanted to ask Monique, was there one person in your life who you think back to who made you feel like you had voice, you had power?
For me, it was my grandfather. He always stressed the importance of education, and he was a community member in Castroville. That's where I'm from, small town. So he always just stressed to us the importance of getting education, and for me, it was important because he passed away 12 years ago. He had a brain aneurysm, and on his deathbed, I remember promising him, Grandpa, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to educate myself. So, all my family's happy I'm here, and they're excited. They're like, Grandpa's with you, and I know he's here with me in spirit.
What's his name?
Nico Torres.
Abuelito Nico.
Mm-hmm.
You're right here. Thank you for bringing us.
Oh, and I did want to say
Yes.
earlier when you had mentioned, one of my colleagues that went to the school last week and said about some of the parents being afraid or feeling that their voice didn't matter because they didn't have the education. I mean, and some of these parents have brilliant ideas, and we really need to educate them on the importance of this topic and using their voice to go to talk to the superintendents, to the school boards, and really advocating for their children.
Right, because that's what democracy looks like as well. Dan, you wanted to jump in.
I was just going to reiterate that the community groups have really been at the forefront of bringing this particular issue to light. Going way back, and there are groups like Padres Unidos in Denver, there's Cadre in Los Angeles, there's Boys and Men of Color, the organization that you're, what is?
Colectiva de Mujeres.
And so it's the community groups that have really made a huge difference and will continue to make a difference. And when maybe you're at a period where you don't have that person to go to, there are community groups that can be providing that kind of support.
And that is, again, what democracy looks like. Deborah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one last comment, that we've often heard that expression, it takes the whole village to raise a child, but in my experience, it's great if you can have the whole village, but if you have that one person, it might be a grandparent, it could be a teacher, it could be the guy who runs the corner store, but it's that person you can go to, especially when you're young, but I think really at any point in our lives, we really need that. But this idea that there have to be hundreds of people to help, sometimes there is just that one person who's your champion, your cheerleader, your encourager, and occasionally, also that kind of, we've been learning this term recently called the warm demander, who's kind of expecting you, encouraging you to rise up and not say easily, I give up, or I can't, or I don't want to, or something, but to warmly say, yes, you can, and we're going to help you, I'm going to help you. Just one other quick comment. We do have a parent center at our school. It's run by parents, so there is, I think, at least some movement on the part of schools to make it a more welcoming place for parents, whatever their own experiences may have been, or if they are concerned about being undocumented, that no one's going to be checking your papers here or asking if you graduated. This is a place for you to come. And as I said, it's staffed by other parents. So we are trying really hard to bring more parents and make it more welcoming for them.
And we're hopeful that soon that can be said about all schools across the country. But maybe not just for, yes.
We have another question, but since Michael went, we'll make sure we get to you. I guess I would just say it was interesting and exciting to me to hear that toxic stress came up. Michael and I obviously worked together on Latino USA, and we had the opportunity to meet with a few of the underground scholars last night before the event today, and to really listen to the way that people are talking about these traumas and starting to understand that they are traumas. There's actual science behind this now, and the science didn't always exist. And it's something I do a lot of reporting on, and I think it's really interesting to talk to Michael and know about his criminal justice reporting, and you see how those things overlap. One of the reasons I personally wanted to get into journalism was I always felt like I was seeing people telling all these stories and acting like they all existed separately in one lane when they're actually all very connected. And maybe that's because my father was incarcerated, my mother was shot, my grandparents raised a lot of foster kids, so I saw how all of these things start to play into them. And so just wanting to make sure that people are asking more questions around something instead of just saying, well, this is just an education story, or this is just a health story, this is just a science story, and really understanding. And so a lot of that is for you all to tell your stories, and we are proud to be a place that wants to help get those voices out there. So thank you for all being here today. But so it was great to hear everyone start to acknowledge those things. So I wonder, the healing circle is something that you would do in response to the traumas, and to hear about this kind of mentoring, and to realize that these programs are trying to bring in. So I guess my kind of simple question is, how much are you either understanding or starting to see people overlapping and seeing that these things can't be treated as just one instance of an issue, that they actually are related in many ways in terms of how you can address them and attack them, whether it's as a mother, as a researcher, as a teacher, or somebody who wants to become a lawyer and make a difference?
Did you want to comment on Daisy's point?
Well, from the researcher's perspective, I think one of the things we're trying to do is make those connections clearer to everybody, because they are connected. So, people think about something like school discipline. Oh, it's just a one-time event, just going to kick this kid out of school. They'll be back in 2 days, no harm. It gives me, not realizing the impact in terms of the family structure. They could be, that could trigger a parent to lose their job, or the fact that it increases the likelihood of a student dropping out. It doubles, well, it's associated with a doubling of the risk. It probably predicts about a 6 to 7% increase in the dropout rate. If teachers knew that, they might be less likely to reach for an out-of-school, or the principal might be less likely to do that. If we realized how even missing a few days of school dramatically reduces your achievement on the National Assessment of Education Progress by a full grade, at 4th grade. So making those connections clear with the sense that if people really knew what they were doing and it was right in their face and they saw the stark injustice, then it would help propel change.
It's almost like you wish that on the first day of school they would hand out a piece of paper that has all of that information so we're aware, because a lot of us maybe are not. All right, we have 2 questions? 2 or 3 questions? These will be the last group of questions that we take. I'm so thankful because usually we have to do these panels in like 45 minutes and you're like, what? And in this panel, we really have been able to spend some time. So again, thank you for staying with us and for those of you who are watching us online. And we'll get these last questions, get our comments, and then we'll wrap. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Araceli Espinosa. I'm an after-school program leader here in East Oakland. And my question is about, we're talking about a lot of the behavior management that is happening in classes and how to reduce that, how to steer away from the school-to-prison pipeline. And a lot of the times students need that type of structure. They need constant structure. They need something that they realize is going to be there, like in a form to tell them about stability. So my question is, what behavior and structural management should stay and which ones should go to support them, especially in an area or in a school community where there's chronic bullying or there's chronic defiance, I don't want to say defiance, but when there's a lot of behavior management that needs to happen and teachers or program leaders are unable to get the curriculum out because behavior management is such an important structure of the classroom. So how could you, depending on all of your different spaces of expertise, how could we manage that or support our students in a better way in that form?
Okay. I actually want to take that one just because I think it's a really specific question. Dan, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of things in terms of the resources for teacher training, not just, it's pre-service, so teachers who are going into the field, if they're getting a master's or preparing to be in a classroom, need a lot more training up front, and oftentimes that gets these emergency certifications or what have you, that gets shortchanged. But it's also an ongoing thing. I mean, once you're in the classroom, it's hard to prepare teachers completely for the experience, and every context is a little different. And having ongoing support and structures and having enough support personnel in the building and having those structures like team meetings or knowing the special educator and having the time to collaborate with your co-teachers and special educators, that's really important, and that's often lacking. You'll hear teachers say, I have no time even to meet with a counselor to find out what's going on with this kid. So we need to provide and you know, with LCAP, there is a mechanism to use some of that funding to provide those missing resources. So structures and resources oftentimes, you know, the structure's not there because the resources have been shortchanged.
Let's take another question and then we'll hear from you. Yes, so come on in.
Hi, my name is Martin. I'm an undergraduate psychology student at San Francisco State. My question is actually really just spurred by what I see happening at San Francisco State right now with the proposed budget cuts to ethnic studies that would cut almost 50% of the classes. So as academics, activists, educators, and journalists, what role does cultural education play in systemic change? And then how can it create empathy and work to defeat media generalizations in populations who have limited access to cultural diversity?
Thank you. I didn't realize that was happening at San Francisco State University.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that question. We'll take the other question there.
Okay. Hi, my name is JD. I'm an undergraduate at UC Berkeley. As was mentioned earlier about the criminalization process that happens very early on, I think something was mentioned about how the classes need to continue and you're looking at it from a collective perspective. However, as soon as you punish whoever is in question, who's in misconduct, you're excluding them from the collective. And that kind of sticks with them for a long time. I mean, I can't generalize my experiences to everybody, but I know that elementary, high school, I did not learn a thing. I did not care to learn because of these punitive tactics that were used and this obsession with standardized testing. And so I guess my specific question is, why aren't we looking at other countries, I think, for example, Norway, that they have a lot higher standardized test scores than us.
Can I actually interrupt you, and can you tell me, can you just share with us, like one of those experiences that you remember as a little kid where you were just like, missed the mark and set you into the wrong, you know, the punishment just completely backfires. Can you just give us one example?
Yeah, sure. So all the way back to, I can remember all the way back to preschool, kindergarten, elementary, high school, maybe there was an unconscious desire for attention, but even if I didn't, wasn't physically disruptive, if I was loud or something, I was always placed in timeout. From even up to high school, you're sent to detention. It's kind of using the same measures in prison, right? You're timeout.
And what was going on for you when you were, what do you think? Was it?
It was a punishment, so it was.
No, I'm saying when you were, whatever it was that you were doing, I don't know, were you speaking out of turn, or were you, kicking a chair, or like what?
Simply not paying attention. If I was just drawing on my notebook and not paying attention to the lecture, I would be singled out. Or just any sort of behavior that wasn't conforming, and
you would be punished for that.
You would be punished for anything, for speaking out. For people, other kids, if they're the class clown, if they're trying to make jokes, they're punished real severely, and that kind of perpetuates their desire to resist these powers and to rebel even more. And I don't understand why no one has noticed that and taken examples of other countries where they don't use those kind of punitive measures, and they kind of try to use the collective to involve that one individual who's going.
And you were going to bring up Norway?
Yeah, Norway, for example, they don't have homework. They don't use the same kinds of punitive tactics. If someone's acting out, they simply ignore them. They don't give them the attention. The little kid who's being disruptive in class, as long as he's not harming anyone, they just ignore him. They leave the responsibility. I think Japan as well, and they leave they let if a child complains or he's being loud, they say, well, why don't you tell him to be loud, so as to kind of have the collective, solve their own problems. And it's just this obsession with standardized testing in the United States. If it's, if we're still behind in other countries that are doing better than us, why are we still using the same tactics that, in the end, just criminalize us too? As Caleb was mentioning earlier.
Okay, and can you tell me what year are you? What are you studying?
I'm a sociology major.
What year?
I'm a third year. I'm a junior.
Are you here?
17. Yeah, I'm here, and I'm also a member of Underground Scholars Initiative. So.
And what's your big dream when you graduate? Like the
graduate
wildest
school,
dream?
PhD.
So you're going to get a PhD in
sociology as well.
Okay. Love that.
Thank you.
That's it for questions? That's it? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's nobody there.
All right. Final thoughts as we wrap up this really profound conversation. I think everybody's just paying so much attention because I think we're being fed so much information, and we're trying to process what we do next, right? What's our responsibility as we move forward next? We'll start like this, and then with you, Caleb, Monique.
So I think just educating, bringing this awareness out to everybody so that they know that it's a problem and it affects everybody in the community, not just some communities, every community.
And I just want to thank you, Monique, for being here. I know that this isn't necessarily what you thought you'd be doing, is to be a community activist, but we're really happy that you're here and that you jumped in for your daughter and for your kids. And good luck with the father of your little girl. Good luck. Dan.
Partly as a response to the last sort of question or statement, I think this idea that we're all part of this community, that we all belong, that we have to treat every child with the love and the respect that we would treat our own children. When we have that mentality, it's not that whether you give a kid a timeout or not, it's the message that goes along with that. If the message is, I want you part of this classroom, I want you to come back to the community and share in whichever way, or I want you to pay attention because this is going to help you be successful. When those are the kinds of messages, and it's reflected in how often we're kicking kids out. It should be, if not zero, very, very, very infrequent. There may be a time where to prevent a dangerous event from occurring. It's never all or nothing. But that sense of community and love has got to really inform how we structure our schools and how we train our teachers and our leaders. And I think that will make a huge difference.
It also helps to have a lot of statistics and information and research. So thank you, Dan, for all you're doing and for helping us to see that with that we can challenge the status quo. Deborah.
I would definitely reiterate that we want our students to always feel welcome, to always feel part of the community, to always feel that not only are they wanted, but we want them to go on and succeed in their lives. But at the same time, schools are, as I said, they're really complex environments, and I think most teachers are always kind of juggling those two, sometimes conflicting needs maybe to really make every student feel welcome, but at the same time to keep the class functioning. And although it may sound simple to ignore a behavior, even that can seem more complex than it may appear, although at times we all do that as teachers. I'm sure there are many parents in the audience, and it can be hard to be 100% consistent 100% of the time. And we are, really invested in working with our students every single day that they're in school. And I honestly believe that most teachers, and even schools, despite the fact that it's really easy to critique schools, the task that we are facing is enormously complicated, and it's always changing all the time what schools are expected to do. But having said that, I don't feel as a teacher myself that administration very rarely talks to me about a standardized testing. It doesn't even come up very much in our professional development workshops. They do try to encourage us to be as thoughtful as we can, and I think change is just something that happens over time. And although we always want it to have happened yesterday, I've been in the schools for 25 years, and I do see changes, both positive and negative, unfortunately, but I do feel there is a movement away from punishment. There is a movement away from suspension. There is even a movement away from sending a student out of the room just for that period. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It continues to happen, but at the same time, unfortunately it is incremental, but it is inching away from it, and maybe when we can take the long view, we'll appreciate what's happened. But I do want to say that I think most teachers really want to keep every kid in the room every day.
And you know what, I find it so interesting that we are, as a country, so quick to applaud our, with all due respect to our service members who are serving in the armed forces across the board, but the teachers are also out there in the front line, so they're also should be credited with, with their service to the country. It's just so crazy. I mean, I understand that you're putting your life on the line in the military, but our teachers also just, we want to critique them, but we also want to show them some love. Thank you for being with us, Deborah. And finally, Caleb.
So I just kind of want to circle around on the couple questions that were asked, and I think that they related as seeing yourself in the curriculum that is taught and the reaction to misbehavior. I have a 10-year-old daughter. She goes to the school that's called Roses and Concrete in East Oakland, and it focuses on social justice. So it's deindustrialized. The kids don't start with the bell. They start with indigenous drumming coming in. And hanging on the walls are pictures of Tupac Shakur, Frederick Douglass, Che Guevara. So when you look at these things and you're reading material about how your people are so intelligent and how they were so capable and able to complete all these tasks, that inspires you more than reading Shakespeare or being looked as a number for standardized testing. It creates a yearning for knowledge that is not currently being taught. So when you start looking at kids as numbers, as dollar signs, and as problems, then that's not educating anybody. So I would like to see a system to foster the cultural aspect of their students and teach them about their lineage, teach them about their people, and give them that cultural wealth. As I like to circle this around as underground scholars and what we're doing for the education process. So programs like ours need to exist in higher education because we don't have the networking, we don't have the resources, we don't have all of the tools needed to do so, but we're still emerging. a lot of times people look at underground scholars and they say, oh, well, it's a success story. But we're still struggling on resources. We're still struggling on hiring staff. So we can talk about these success stories, but what are we doing to support them? What are we doing to get the word out? What are we doing to empower them? So I think it's a matter of looking at new ways to attack the problem by reaching into people's cultures and reaching out for people that have experience in the system. So that goes from K to 12 to the higher education system.
And having people own their voices, right? And own their power and own their role, which is why I'm so thrilled that all of you are here with us today. This has really been very powerful. Again, I want to thank our partners, the California Endowment and the Underground Scholars Initiative, for being our partners. We also want to thank, round of applause, California Endowment. Again, I want to thank my team, Annette, Daisy, Michael on our end, for being here and for working with all of you. Remember, y'all can listen to Latino USA on your phone by going to latinousa.org. If not, if you want to go old school, you can actually listen to us on the radio at KQED and WLRN. Our audience numbers, I think I said at the beginning, grew in the last year by 39%. The Latino USA radio audience numbers grew by 39%. So, yeah. But as Caleb said, and as I tell my students, it's always a struggle. You know, we have the big dream and we're going to keep going, pero no es fácil. Nunca es fácil, especially when we are challenging, right? We're challenging, we're getting under people's skin, we're talking about these issues that, frankly, for many people would remain invisible. So for all of you being here, thank you. Remember, humanizingamerica.org, right? In the Thick, the podcast, political podcast, and on the fall on PBS, America by the Numbers. I want to thank our panel. First, Baktun 12, Shago, Yohara Ayala, Rocco Contreras, Raymond Martinez, and Destiny Villa. Thank you so much for being up here and for believing in your voice as artists. We love that. I was looking at them and I was like, who's going to be nominated for the next Academy Award? It'll happen. Hashtag Oscar so white. It will happen, you guys. It will happen. That was the joke. I thought you guys were going to start laughing. I want to thank my panel, Caleb Martinez, Monique Rodriguez, Dan Losen, and Debora Gordon. Thank you so much. You've been so thoughtful with all of your time and for all of your heart in this conversation. And for all of you, thank you so much for being here. This has been amazing. Let's do this, right? It's our democracy, it's our country, it's our stories, our voices, our narrative. Let's own it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, we have been immortalized.
I gotta get a picture with you too.
You really want to get it? I'll even jump on stage for you. I got you. It's so great.